Welcome into Vertical Pursuit, the webcast, podcast. Mike Barrett, Mike Tatlock. I always say that, webcast, podcast, but it just want to let you know it is a audio podcast only, or it can be video as well. We do both. So we're available on Spotify, on iTunes, on the Vertical Pursuit app, also on YouTube. And I think you can even get them by going to the Vertical Pursuit website at verticalpursuit.org. We should reset once in a while what Vertical Pursuit is and how it came to be and how it was kind of your brainchild years ago and how a book came out that you put together, which really gives really good tools. I hate to think we've hijacked it, or I've hijacked it, and turned it into this rough men's message on discipleship, but that's kind of what it was meant to be. Not that everybody isn't welcome, but I just have felt that there aren't many of these things out there for men, especially podcasts like this, where it's a little bit of a hybrid. But talk about the vision behind Vertical Pursuit.
Well, the vision, the word vertical means upward, right? And then pursuit is the chase, the pursuit. And the Bible tells us that God pursues us. And so we love because he loved us first. And so we talk about pursuing God. It's that he's the solution to everything. The Bible uses the word disciple. It's who are you following right now? And I think that's the question we could ask everybody. We're all following something or someone. We're all looking to something or someone that is
where we disciple of something.
We all are. Absolutely. And everybody's making choices. What's right or wrong? Well, where are you getting that from? Because wherever you're being informed, it's forming you. And so we're all being shaped. So the question is, not who are you following, but really we're all following. And so is it Jesus? Is it not? Is it the culture? Is it the world? Is it, all these different worldviews out there? So it's about vertically pursuing, but doing it in community. Yeah. That's the other big piece to this thing.
Well, and one way you do that, a big reason why we did this. Now, Mike is a pastor. I used to be an NBA broadcaster, but communication, the ability to talk and converse has always come pretty easy to both of us. So the biggest way that you can get into community and you can get messages out, obviously, is simply through communication. So that leads me a little bit to what I wanted to talk about in this episode, and we've pushed this episode back, this topic. I don't know why it keeps getting swept under the rug. It's kind of a different one to hear it, and it's not maybe if you're not a believer or you don't have any church background, which is fine, it's kind of one of those things you hear and you think maybe it means something that it doesn't. Yeah. And that's apologetics. And you did a sermon on this a while back, and I thought, well, I first stood up like, I'm not going to apologize. What do you ask me to do? And then you start realizing it isn't what you think. It's actually the best way I saw it described. And this goes into the communication piece I was just talking about. It's the tool of a disciple is apologetics. Yeah. And it is it's using our ability to communicate to establish truth. Yeah. Correct? Yeah. I was going to ask you what it is, but I kind of just read what I think it is. Yeah. But is that what I remember, your sermon was a long time ago that you gave on apologetics, but it was fascinating. And at the end of the day, I came back thinking, well, this is just the ability to communicate, and doing it, you can communicate in a lot of ways that aren't good. Communicate in a way that establishes truth, but hopefully does it in a way that people want to hear what you're saying. Totally. And maybe ask more when you're done. So is that in your mind what apologetics is?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody has an apologetic. They don't use that word. And when we hear the word apologetic, we think of the word apology, which is, today we think of apology as like, I'm sorry, my fault, I did something wrong. But actually the root word of apology is tied to the word apologetics, which means give an explanation for something. So, when you go and you apologize, your intent is to give an explanation of, I did this because of this, right? But it's not about feeling bad about something. It's not feeling insecure about something. It's actually out of this sense of confidence. And everybody has an apologetic. Right now people are saying, okay, I got to build my case. That's actually where the word comes from. When you think of like all the courtroom shows that we watch. Yeah. You see an attorney who's building their case.
And I thought attorneys too. That's good.
That's it. So you go, oh, wait, I watch all those shows. Yes, Perry Mason. Like all the shows we grew up watching. It's the idea that you're building a case. And out of confidence And this is the explanation. And so when the Bible talks about it, it comes from a word in the Greek. The word apologetic is a Greek word, and it means to give a defense or give an explanation or give a reason for the hope that you have. And so as Jesus followers, we have hope in him. And somebody goes, well, why?
Right.
And then you say, well, here's why. That's your apologetic. That's it. That's what it means. I'm giving a reason for why I have faith and why I have confidence in that. And so people do it all the time. Like if I say, hey, why are you a Ducks fan? Well, because this and this. You just gave an apologetic. You gave a reason for the confidence you have in that team. And so, or in your case, against the Ducks fans.
No, I'm not against the Ducks. I just went to Oregon State.
See, but that's your apologetic, right? You're saying, well, I went to school there. I have these
And that kind of
reasons for that.
sounds like an apologetic.
Well,
I have friends who are hardline, hate one way or the other.
Yeah.
I always say I don't. I did look it up in the dictionary. Apologetics. Reasoned arguments or writings in justification of something, typically a theory or religious doctrine.
Yep.
So as you just said, you can kind of say this is, why do you have faith? Why do you put your trust in Jesus? Then your apologetic is the answer. And I guess it's kind of bridge building too.
Yeah, totally.
And in the Bible, and I just found one example of this because I was curious. So in Corinthians, Paul writes, to the Jews, I became like a Jew in order to win Jews. To the weak, I became weak that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people that by all means I might save some.
Yeah.
So in the way that we're talking about it now, that's basically him saying, that's my ability to communicate, and that's why I'm explaining my beliefs to others in a way that, and he even says, he's implying even deeper than that, in that he becomes like them, meets them where they're at, in order that they would listen to what he has to say. Totally. So that's kind of, I would think, kind of an in-depth next stage of apologetics, correct?
Absolutely. It's not, apologetics isn't just, I have confidence in what I believe, but it's also understanding and how you're communicating and to whom you're communicating. So like in that case, he's like, well, to a Jew, I had to communicate to a Jew. What was he saying by that? What he was saying is that he knew his audience. And for someone who grew up in Jewish heritage, there were these prophecies about Jesus, about the Messiah that was coming. If you're talking to a non-Jewish, say a Greek culture, they didn't have those prophecies. They didn't care about that. So when Paul says, I want to try to give an explanation, evidence, a credible argument for why Jesus is the one, he's like, I'm going to meet you on your terms. I'm going to meet you on where you're at.
Right.
Oh, okay, so I'm going to go use those prophecies that you believe in, and I'm going to use those as evidence to point that Jesus was the fulfillment. So he did that because he knew what that meant to them. And then he goes over to the Greeks or the Romans, and he's like, I'm going to use a different strategy for you. And so I think we have to know our faith, but we also have to know the audience and who we're talking to, because just like using the attorney strategy, right?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different attorneys. You can have divorce attorneys, you have real estate attorneys, and so what you want is someone who knows the audience or knows the context. It's the same thing.
And that basically is apologetics.
That's apologetics. Absolutely.
So how do you equip people then? Is there such a word as apologetic or something? How do you, because a lot of people will think when they get asked, they don't have an answer necessarily. For why? Well, why do you have a faith? Where's your faith? I don't know. My family always went to church. I guess that tends to be their answer. So it seems like if you are someone who is trying to create disciples, which is what I think we all should be doing. I think when you consider the favor that it does them in so many different ways, and I'm not saying push it. I'm just saying if they ask, have an answer. So how do people better create an answer or create the tools to give an answer that is a adequate apologetic, if you will?
I love that question because when the word apologetics is used in Peter, it was one of the books of the New Testament. It says, always be ready to give an apologetic answer, reason for the hope that you have. And here's the best part of it, though. He says, always be ready to give an answer. That implies somebody's asking a question. So the first step is, am I even living in such a way that makes people want to ask me the question? So am I living with hope? Am I living with love? Am I living with the life of Jesus that by my life. So I tell people all the time, your life is your first apologetic. Not your thoughts, but how you live your life. That begs the question, like, oh, you're hopeful. Now makes somebody go, why, right? Yeah. So if we're not even living in such a way that begs the question, we're missing the starting point. But let's assume that we are. Let's assume that we have this faith and we're living it out. Not perfect by any ways. It's not about being perfect. But, you walk with people who, I've sat this last year, we've had families in our church. One of the most tragic things is a family that their eldest son was killed in a tragic car accident. Here's a family of faith. Do you think they have days where they're questioning God, doubting God? Of course they do. We've all been through those times, and that's okay. God can handle that. But then people are going, but I see the other days that you are still, like, you're going to church, you're believing God, you're trusting. Like, I don't understand this. That's because they're living with a hope, not because there's perfection. Sometimes the way that we express our hope is even in the worst situations. That's when it begs the question, because now you have something that stands way above this idea of perfect religion and all of that. It's like, wait a minute. How are you getting by? Like, so I just want to encourage people, like, your apologetic life is not about being perfect. Sometimes we put on display during our most imperfect times the hope that people want. So, but when you understand, like, what is apologetics, I always tell people there's a bunch of ways we can go on this, but two, to simplify it, one is experiential apologetics. So if I ask you, hey, you've got this hope or you got this faith, why? Well, tell them your story. Tell them your story. You don't have to have all the Bible verses. You don't have to have all the theology down and all that. Well, I'll talk about that in a second, but give a reason that just comes out of your journey. I've talked with so many people like, I was an alcoholic and man, I went down a path and I was destructive to myself and I was my family and I couldn't overcome this addiction. And then, man, I came to know Jesus and he showed me how I can work through those things, gave me the tools. My life is different now. What did you do? You just gave an experiential apologetic for the hope and the faith that you have. Every single one of us that is a follower of Jesus, you have a story to tell. That's your apologetic.
Well, and as you talked about a moment ago with this family, and I know as a pastor, you get called into those situations, and we have discussed this before, but it's also probably, as we talked about, knowing timing, knowing your audience, because I would imagine oftentimes when someone has, maybe in the midst or in the throes of having just lost somebody, and you come in to comfort, as a pastor often does, you were then asked why. So that apologetic is probably much more difficult than two guys at the bar and a guy wonders why one guy's happy and it kind of ticks him off.
Yep. Well, and that's it. As a pastor, that is the number one question that people ask. Those are those apologetic questions. Why do bad things happen? Why did God not stop this? Those are the ones that are like the very core of our being. We're trying to wrestle out, and it's hard. I remember I get a phone call from a woman in our church. She's like, "Hey, I'm in Virginia. My mom is dying. I can't get there in time. Will you go up and see her at the hospital and be with her as she passes?" I said, absolutely. I go up to the hospital, walk into the room, and they're like, "Hey, you need to stay in the lobby because a family member is so angry at God right now.
He doesn't want to hear your apology.
Doesn't want to hear it either. He doesn't want me around because I represent God, and he's so angry at God because he's like, my mom followed Jesus and now she's dying of cancer. Where's the compassion? Where's the healing that I read about?" And they're so angry with God. And actually, that's okay. Like, it's okay to be angry. God can handle that. There's nothing wrong with being angry in those situations. But what it does is it stirs up inside of us. Like, I don't have an answer to hang that emotion on. I don't know what to do with that. And that's very real. So there's those hard questions, and some of those there's answers. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. That's why it's called faith. Yeah. But this leads me to, I think, a big piece of the apologetic conversation is something called evidential apologetics. So we talked about a lawyer, an attorney that's building a case on evidence. There's enough evidence to have faith. We talk about blind faith. We don't always have the answers to every question, but there's enough answers to so many of the questions that it allows me to take a bold step of faith and walk in that. And so we call it evidential apologetics, which is pretty fun. Yeah. You get into some like archaeology, you get into studying like the integrity of the Bible. And how do we know the Bible we have today is actually reliable?
And I love
all of those things.
I've watched those shows where they go back and do that, and they put together I think it was back. There was a good special on the Shroud of Turin at one point, and it went back and talked about the lost 40 days of Jesus, and it got into some of that stuff, which I never even would have considered to be an apologetic, but the evidential apologetic in that. Now I see what you're talking about, and that's interesting. And I've even heard, I think I was doing some reading this morning, somebody had made the comment, it's more difficult to use evidential apologetic as an atheist.
Yeah.
There's not as much evidence,
No.
which is kind of crazy to think about, but it's pretty true.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. And that's why, I mean, I've spent a big part of my life on the evidential apologetics, part of my degree in college, but because I think it's fascinating. You know, just this week, I had a woman, she's new to our church and she wanted to meet. So we're sitting in my office and she makes the comment, and it's fine. I can handle these. I love these conversations. She goes, I just don't think the Bible's reliable. I think she compared it to the telephone game.
Oh,
That,
I've
hey,
heard that
we've all
too.
played that. You whisper in someone's ear, and then by the time it gets passed around, it's distorted and all that kind of stuff. And people use that a lot. But it's not based actually in fact and evidence. And this is where evidential apologetics comes in. There's a lot of technical words I won't get into. Like one of them is called textual criticism. And it's like, what is that? Well, what that means is it answers the question. Like, are the manuscripts, the language, was it passed on? Did the scribes fill some things in and distort it and all those sort of things? There's so much work that's been done, scholars and researchers, to come to the conclusion. And it's pretty, I mean, it's awesome.
People that set out to discredit it.
Yes.
And those are the great stories to read that I love.
And actually, I would just say this, those who over the last hundreds of years, there have always, in fact, this is so funny, historically, right around the time after Jesus died, the Bible was being formed, and automatically out of the gate, people started to question its legitimacy and so forth. And then you get to the disciples, and they had their disciples, and they were attacked that the Bible is not this and this. There was a guy, his name was Justin Martyr, and he was known for being this one who was the defender of the faith, right? And he had this group of guys, and they were called the Apologists. And it was kind of like when you watch TV shows and you see like, the territory that's overtaken, and you get the good guys that come in. These were the good guys, the Apologists, but they were killed. I mean, like we watched things like Gladiator and Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor at the time. He hated these Christians,
right?
And when they defended the Christian faith, he just killed them. And so at some point, is my apologetic true, even if it's not popular? And I think that's so there's been criticism, there's been persecution, but what it's done, it's strengthened the valid part of the Bible. Because when it's been attacked, people have had to address those, and now it's stood the time. That's what makes the Bible so special, is people have tried to destroy it, they've tried to eliminate it, it's only come back stronger. And so all those attacks has kind of made our apologetic even better.
Well, and that takes us back to what we were talking about a minute ago with the conversation between religious or faith, or religion or faith. And there was something else, and I didn't really view this as an apologetic until we started talking about this, but to take something of the here and now, Chris Pratt, the actor.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Totally.
And I love him in everything he's been in.
Yep.
Well, the cancel culture went after him because he was tied to, I can't even remember the church in California that he was tied to.
I think Zoe Church is where he
had to
goes.
come out and say, I think it was just in the news today, that I'm not. So it sounded like he was bending a knee and caving. So initially I'm like, don't apologize. Right. And kind of started to think that was the case. His quote was, and it turns out, the way I read this now, it's an apologetic.
Yep.
He says, I didn't know that I would become the face of religion when really I'm not a religious person. So then you go, okay, now he's apologizing for having gone to a church or being a Christian, and cancel culture wants him out of all of the movies and out of the X-Men. I get out. But then he says, I think there's a distinction between being religious, adhering to the customs created by man, oftentimes appropriating the awe reserved for who I believe is a very real God, and using it to control people, to take money from people, to abuse children, to steal land, to justify hatred. Whatever it is, the evil that's in the heart of every single man has glommed onto the back of religion and come along for the ride. So he used this time to come out and what I thought was originally going to be, as we see, taking a knee, apologizing so that he can stay in these movies, but he didn't. He took it to give almost a historical apologetic about why he is a Christian.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was strong, and I started reading it thinking I was going to be disappointed with the way he'd respond to it. But it turns out he gave kind of a masterful apologetic.
No, how he unpacked that was because, one of the attacks that people have on the church right now is, the church is full of a bunch of hypocrites. And I go, it absolutely is. Who needs Jesus is us hypocrites. Right. So Jesus never said that, you're going to go out and, be better than everybody else. And I hear that all the time. People constantly say, I don't want to go to church and I don't want to be a part of the faith of Christ and Jesus is because, and they list all the things they've done, the crusades and, the ways that people have abused and exploited. The reality is there's always been bad people that have exploited everything that's good in any arena. Let me boil it down to a simple thing. You go to a restaurant. If I go to a restaurant and I have bad service at one restaurant, does that mean I swear off all restaurants? That sounds pretty simplistic. Actually, it's very true. And what culture does too is we take these outliers and say it's the norm. So we say okay, yes, here's these bad people. That doesn't speak that that's the truth of all of them. There are far more in the history of the church, Jesus followers who are compassionate and loving and generous, far more. But if you want to hide behind the argument that, I don't want to follow Jesus because his followers can be that, it's yeah, I'll give that to you. And that's what he did. What he did was sure, yes, there's been abuse, there's been bad things, but that doesn't speak for who Jesus is. And I love how he did that because he sort of it kind of took their ammo away.
I was going to say.
He didn't try to defend the exploitation or the abuse because why would we defend that? He said, yeah, that happens. Let's just get back to, but Jesus isn't that way. And I love how he disarmed that. That was a great apologetic.
Yeah, because he didn't, when he first started to say, no, I don't, I have nothing to do with that church. I've never been there, which is another comment he made about it. I thought he was probably being untruthful for fear of losing a future role, which a lot of people have done. But he didn't. He ended up I love the way he did that in a creative way, which leads me to, as we kind of come down our final stretch here, but not everybody has Chris Pratt's ability to wordsmith and communicate a message that resonates with people or even hears them remotely, gives them remotely what they need to hear. So what are some simple skills that you give people because I know that you guys, especially in the church, you try to equip these cohorts. You're giving them, you're giving these cohorts of guys, you're trying to open up the ability to communicate. When you do go out and you try to make disciples or at least have adequate answers to questions that would lead to discipleship, what are some of the things and some of the tips that you give people? Some of the things that you say that, guys, if you are asked about this, first of all, having no shame, which the Bible says do not have any shame in this. But if somebody asks, let's say, who doesn't know you that well about your faith, what's some tips for somebody, or what are some things they can do to make themselves better at the skill of apologetics? So that they can put themselves in the proper light.
Yeah, I think the first thing is it's not our job to convince anybody of anything. And I think that's that burden we feel is I've got to prove God to people. And that's not what we're to do. I think the thing is we're messengers and start with your message. And so that's that testimony piece. Yeah. I tell people all the time, you don't have to defend the Bible, just tell your story. Because here's what's the best part about your story as your apologetic. I can't take that from you. When you tell me, hey, I was an alcoholic, or I was this, or I was this, or I was this, or whatever, and I came to know Jesus, and he's been working on my life, I can't look at you and go, no. I can't deny that from you. That's your story. And so I tell people, just start with your story. Don't feel the pressure to convince anybody of anything. Let the Spirit of God do that. But then I also think, too, is it's great to educate yourself on this thing called evidential apologetics. Just put that in Google, and there's a ton of resources out there. I don't have time to recommend 1,000 books, but just write evidential apologetics, and you'll just go down a deep hole. And it's actually, you come away going, wow, oh my goodness, over all these years, the scholarship research that's been put in that shows the validity that God's word is reliable. That's the big piece. And as you do that, it does give you a confidence,
Yeah.
not an arrogance. That's not what we want. We want a confidence to be able to share what we believe. And I think if people could start with a testimony, don't put the pressure on yourself. That's your job to convince anybody of anything, but also educate yourself that the Bible is reliable, and it will give you the confidence to go from there.
Well, and as you're saying, arm yourself, because with information and with they always say have an answer ready, and you just talked about, even in the Bible it says that, because oftentimes if you're talking to somebody who doesn't have really any background experience on that, they're going to ask you questions, and you want to sound intelligent enough, because I think for some people who really don't have any idea about this stuff, they're going to look at you like, what? You believe that?
Right.
For me, I always kind of want to have as you said, evidence.
Well, and on that point, because you brought up earlier when Paul said he became all things to all people, I tell everybody, before you talk, spend more time listening. Listen to people's questions with sincerity. Don't try to just tell them an answer that they're not even interested in.
Right.
So I want to do more listening before I do more talking, and I'll invite people along. Even as a pastor, I don't tell people I have all the answers. I invite people, let's go discover that together. I want to hear your question. What are the things you're wrestling with? And say, let's journey that together, versus you got all the questions, I'm like the man with all the answers. Like, no, we don't need to do that. Let's go discover these things together.
Maybe because I like that kind of stuff. I like history, and I like evidence, and I like seeing stories about the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they found them in a cave and how it matched up. And maybe because of that, maybe that's why I loved this topic, even though it's different. And I knew
the Indiana Jones inside of you coming out
a little bit. Yeah. I mean, we're in a weird way. Yeah. And I think for men oftentimes, and we talked about this with Dave Turin, this adventure kind of explorer and gold mining and whatnot. I don't know. I just feel like for me, and it's not like, and I also am cautioned in that, because I don't want to have somebody say, well, isn't God's word enough? You shouldn't need any more evidence than that. How do you answer that question?
I think it comes down to, again, who the person is, how we're talking to them. Some people just need a testimony. They need a story. Some people need more of that evidence. There's also philosophical apologetics, which we didn't even get into that, but Jordan Peterson, guys like that are really articulating now from a philosophical standpoint that things do point to a creator. And so I think it depends on the person, how they process things, and what's the path they need.
Well, there's more on this. I mean, you can go on the gracechapel.org site and find your sermon on apologetics if you have more questions about it. I wanted to dip into it. Yeah. I know it's a little different, but for me, it was fascinating. And then the more I dug, and I didn't really even take that long, I just started kind of looking up the term and then looking up stories. And then all of a sudden you start seeing it differently. You start seeing it in pop culture, especially with the story I told about Chris Pratt. Okay, that was his apologetic. So I don't know, I think it's fascinating, and I want to learn more about it. And if you want to, again, Mike did a great sermon on it back, I don't know, a few months ago.
Yeah.
But we appreciate you guys always listening and watching the Vertical Pursuit podcast. I want to thank our crew. I already mentioned them, but Nick Livingston and Colton Myers and David Ward. You guys are great for spending all the time and putting this stuff together for people. We love the encouragement we're getting. We love the comments. So stay here. We're going to keep doing what we're doing and keep trying to reach people, and we will see you next time on Vertical Pursuit. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast, comment, or message us, and check out our website at verticalpursuit.org. Download the VP app and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.